Director McGrath, since 1945, the McCarran-Ferguson Act has been the foundation upon which we've had strong consumer protections because of good and sometimes bad state regulation, but I think a good market for consumers. And you've alluded to, and I agree with you, that what we have in this country now is a hybrid market, and you've given some examples of that. The TRIA, NFIP, even the Affordable Care Act are involvements of the federal government in the regulation of insurance markets in this country. And my concern is that based on your report, the FIO report, and your recommendations, if those recommendations are not met, what would you anticipate FIO to do?
First thing we're going to do is bring people together to try to solve the problem. We're doing that already. If we get to a point where the problem's not solved, then there needs to be hopefully we can present a solution.
And that's where my next question goes to. That solution. Do you anticipate coming back to Congress asking for regulatory authority?
No, my expectation is the report, that, as you note, does not call for a federal regulator, to the surprise of some. What we say is we need to solve the problem. And rather than focus on should we develop some structure that implements something one way or another, our objective is solve the problem. So, for example, I cited NARAB 2, something that this committee has supported. That's an example of federal role to impose uniformity where needed.
So you don't anticipate seeking any regulatory authority for FIO in any time in the future or at all?
What I anticipate is working hard to fulfill our current statutory mandate.
And having been an insurance commissioner for 6 years, in fact, I think you and I were on a panel years ago in Illinois, you have been very familiar with McCarran-Ferguson. Let me ask you directly, do you think that the McCarran-Ferguson Act as it exists today should either be upheld and left alone, modified, or repealed, and why?
I don't have an opinion on the McCarran-Ferguson Act. The bottom line is we need to move away from the state versus federal debate because it stifled solutions to problems that in some cases have been around for decades. We need as a country to provide better and more efficient regulation for consumers. In many cases the states can do this. In some cases it's going to require federal help.
And you've acknowledged, I think in your report, that consumer protections have been handled better by way of state regulation. Would you agree with that?
Generally speaking, that is true, and the reason is exactly the reason you stated in your opening comment, which is in the P&C industry in particular, there are very localized needs. Sometimes within a state, one county is different from another.
Exactly. Risks are not homogeneous, so they're heterogeneous, essentially.
Correct.
I mean, we see that on all types of geographic locations. Speaking in terms of our domestic insurers and their protections, I mean, we're losing market share, we're losing premium to foreign and especially European carriers. My concern is Solvency II. My concern is the backdoor of ComFrame. What guarantees or assurances can you give us that that our domestic carriers can be protected, especially in light of different standards of capital requirements that may be as a result of Solvency II?
Importantly, the international activity is the development of standards. It is the development of best practices for companies for supervisors and companies that are operating around the world. Before those standards are implemented, it will require some action by the states or the federal government to implement those standards.
And that's where FIO plays a role. I mean, to sort of be the spokesperson in those negotiations. And
our view is we should assert on behalf of the United States leadership in these conversations, work to develop consensus with our international counterparts, but provide the leadership that the United States justifiably should provide.
Protect. Thank you. Mr. Leonardi, just real quickly, I've got 45 seconds left. Talk to me about mitigation and its importance.
Mitigation in terms of catastrophe?
Yes.
I think it's extremely important. I think that a number of the insurance companies, the large property casualty and reinsurance companies, have recognized the need for mitigation. I think the issue is getting those provisions passed through legislatures, whether it be shutters for windstorms or fixing the shoreline, moving back from the shoreline and rebuilding and things like that.
Thank you. And one real last quick question, Mr. Leonardi. Is there anything that you would propose to allow for the investment of private insurance for flood purposes, for flood insurance purposes in your state? Any changes to the law today?
We actually have just allowed a private insurer or a private insurer of flood insurance to sell along with about 15 other states just in the last 3 weeks. So we would
it's out there. Capacity's out there, in your opinion?
Yes.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now the